Coming up today on LinkedIn News Live. She's ranked on Fortune's most powerful women's list, but her journey to the C-suite was a winding path with many roadblocks. We speak with the CEO of AT&T Business, the first woman of color to hold that role, who says authenticity is one's greatest superpower. Plus, the lottery for H-1B visas begins next week. What you need to know from an immigration attorney. All that next. Hello, I'm Caroline Fairchild, and welcome to LinkedIn News Live, where the business conversation begins with you. It's March 3rd, and here's a quick look at the top headlines trending right now on LinkedIn. Unpaid internships are up for debate. NYC rent prices fall. An immigration overhaul risks H-1B reform. Let's take a deeper look into that story. The push to increase the number of visas for highly skilled foreign workers may be moot if lawmakers decide to tackle the problem piecemeal and overhaul the president's sweeping immigration reform. That's according to Bloomberg. The administration wants to expand options for highly skilled workers, measures that big tech companies have been calling for. Joining me now to discuss is Jason Finkelman. He's an immigration attorney. Jason, welcome to LinkedIn News Live.
Thanks for having me, Caroline.
All right, so let's break it down for those who are joining us in this stream. Biden saying one thing, House Democrats are saying a completely different thing. What's the difference?
Yeah, so the proposed legislation right now has a bunch of immigration rules set in it. The big one that most people are focusing on is expanding immigrant visas, employment-based immigrant visas for those who may already be here on H-1B visas or other employment-based visas. But the proposed legislation does not expand the 85,000 H-1B visa cap currently in place. And I think a lot of people are concerned about that because there is a need from U.S. employers to expand that H-1B visa cap.
And how has the pandemic spurred that need to expand the cap?
Yeah, I think we're seeing right now a greater need in science, technology, engineering, mathematics sectors from U.S. employers seeking to hire the best global talent. And as a result, last year in 2020, we saw a record number of H-1B visa registrations submitted in March 2020. There were over 275,000 H-1B visa registrations for those 85,000 H-1B visas. So there's a lot of demand from U.S. employers for the top global talent right now.
And Jason, as you know very well, this is a topic that we see tons of conversation on LinkedIn about. People have a lot of questions. So if you're joining us in the stream right now and have questions about the H-1B process, Jason is your man to answer them. So please let us know in the stream what your questions are and we'll get them answered on the show. Jason, how are the tech companies responding to this little dispute that we're seeing on Capitol Hill right now? Are they on one side or the other? What do they want?
Yeah, it's really hard to say. I'd say they're kind of on both sides, right? There's a lot of U.S. employers, especially tech companies, that have a lot of Indian and Chinese foreign nationals on H-1B visas in their workforce that have been here many, many, many decades and are waiting in a long waiting line, so to speak, for their green card. And there's a lot of concern for those people to be able to adjust right now. On that same token, there's a lot of U.S. employers, large and small, that are seeking highly skilled foreign talent, especially those with cutting edge knowledge, very sophisticated knowledge in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics sectors. And they're in desperate need for that talent to grow and innovate their business and to be able to also expand and hire American workers too. So there's a strong need right now for more H-1B visa numbers.
And this process of obtaining an H-1B visa for a particular job at your company, it's not an easy one. For those who maybe are joining us in the stream, don't know anything about the process, break down for us a little bit, just some of the hoops that companies have to just jump through to ensure that they can prove that this visa is warranted.
Yeah, the simple answer to that is the H-1B visa has two requirements. One, there's a U.S. employer that's going to offer a foreign national a job that at a minimum requires a bachelor's degree to perform those functions. And two, the foreign national holds in their hands a bachelor's degree or higher that relates to the position they're going to be working in. Each year in March, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services makes 85,000 H-1B visas available for all U.S. employers. Every year, over at least the past decade, USCIS gets more registrations than there are available visas. And so there's a lottery for those visas every year. And like I said earlier, there's a lot of demand. And frankly, there's a low chance, mathematically speaking, of success in that lottery. And that impacts U.S. employers as well as foreign nationals significantly.
And you've called the next couple of weeks that we have coming up, March 9th to the 25th, the Super Bowl for H-1B visas. Why is it the Super Bowl? What's going to happen in the next couple of weeks?
Yeah, so there's a really several week period from March 9th to March 25th in which U.S. employers must file an online H-1B visa registration for any foreign national they seek to hire in 2021. That's new H-1B visas. If you're already here on an H-1B visa, you can change your visa at any time. But for those employers, if they don't file that registration between March 9th and March 25th for a new H-1B visa candidate, and or they're not lucky in the lottery, they will have to wait until 2022. And so, by way of example, last year, 275,000 registrations. There's a significant demand, and companies are going to hurt if they can't get the talent they need to grow and innovate their business.
Well, Jason, I'm seeing some questions rolling into the stream. Ella in Connecticut, she's asking, any advice on how to avoid H-1B visa denials? I'm sure you have a lot of advice, but a little bit snippet for Ella over here.
Yeah, so we saw a significant increase over the last 4 years with the previous administration of H-1B requests for evidence and denials, a significant uptick. And mostly those were challenging whether the U.S. employer was truly offering the foreign national a job that at a minimum requires a bachelor's degree, and whether that foreign national had a theoretical and practical knowledge base gained from their course of study to perform the functions of the position. So it's really, really important now to make sure as the U.S. employer, you're demonstrating with significant evidence that the job, in fact, is one that uniformly requires a bachelor's degree at a minimum to perform the functions of the position, and teasing out course by course, from the foreign national's academic transcript, how they learn the knowledge to perform the functions of the position they're going to be working on. That's really where we've seen USCIS challenge H-1B petitions significantly over the last 4 years.
And Jason, you're on the front lines of immigration right now. As an attorney, why is getting this reform so right, what we're seeing on Capitol Hill right now?
Yeah, it's really critical right now because our economy is functioning significantly with STEM jobs. We know objectively through much data that there is a need from U.S. employers to be able to hire STEM talent. We know U.S. universities are pumping out very significant numbers of foreign nationals that are getting bachelor's, master's, PhD level degrees in these fields. And if we have U.S. employers in need of this talent, we have foreign nationals being trained at our U.S. universities to provide that talent to U.S. employers. We have to come to a fix to get that to sort of grow our economy and help these employers to be able to continue their businesses, frankly.
Well, given the state of the economy, if there's a time to get this right, I think it's right now. Jason, I always appreciate your insights on all things immigration. If you're on the stream right now and not following Jason, be sure to go to his LinkedIn profile and do that right now. And thanks for joining us on LinkedIn News Live.
Thanks, Caroline. I appreciate it.
All right, for more stories like these, be sure to check out the news module to the right of your LinkedIn feed. Or if you're in mobile, you can click into that search box. A new report out by Crunchbase finds that before companies reach the IPO stage, just under half of U.S. private companies that have raised more than $100 million in funding don't have any women on their boards. Women are underrepresented in all categories of board member, including investor seats, executive director spots, and independent director roles. The numbers for women of color are even worse. Joining me now to discuss this and even more is AT&T Business CEO Ann Chow. Ann, welcome to LinkedIn News Live.
Thank you so much, Caroline, for having me.
All right, let's start with this report out from Crunchbase this week. Do those numbers surprise you at all?
Sadly, they don't surprise me. They are disappointing, though, right? And they are incredibly frustrating. When we look at the progress that women have made in the workplace, it has been significant. But as evidenced by that report, we still have such a long way to go.
And recently, there have been a lot of policies that have been put in place at the public level to ensure that these numbers start moving in the right direction. Talk to me a little bit about some of those policies. Are you encouraged by them? Should the private sector consider adopting them as well?
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, definitely encouraged by them. If we look at what California has done, or even the NASDAQ, right, in terms of guidance around the requirement for more diversity at the board level. It's funny, Caroline, every every year that goes by, we hear about, oh, well, women will achieve equality in 75 years and 100 years. And that number keeps moving, right? And I think one of the most concerning things that we see now is, as a result of COVID, that there is a real risk of women exiting the workforce, right? And so I do believe that there need to be even more assertive measures, if you will, taken by all sectors to very purposefully diversify their employee base, their leadership, as well as their governance.
I want to get into some of those steps. Before I do, let's say hi to some members who are joining us in the stream. We have Mario from Los Angeles, Edwin from Kansas City, Phil from St. Louis, Pamela from Baton Rouge, and Jennifer from Atlanta. Thanks for joining us on LinkedIn News Live. I'm here with Ann Chow. She's the CEO of AT&T Business. We're talking diversification in the workspace, but also she became CEO just on the eve of this pandemic and had to lead the company. So if you have questions on leadership, management, how to really do diversity and inclusion well, be sure and get those questions into this stream. And let's talk about the pandemic a little bit, particularly how it's impacted working women. Mm-hmm. You say measures need to be put in place. Those measures need to be put in place now if centuries of progress are not going to be taken away from millions of women's careers. What needs to happen?
Yeah, so I think it's not just one thing, Caroline. And I think this is what many organizations struggle with. But I would say you've got to look at your talent very holistically, right? So at every phase of your talent life cycle, right? Whether it's where and how you're hiring and recruiting employees, whether it's how you're growing and grooming and developing your employees, right? To how you're managing your governance at the most senior level in terms of those choice points, right? So I really feel that every organization has got to do a really deep inspection, if you will, about the embedded processes, the embedded cultures, and a topic that's near and dear to my heart, which is the embedded biases that may exist in those processes and decision-making capabilities, because that's really a significant amount of what's holding us back.
And you were the first woman of color to hold the CEO spot of the business unit at AT&T. You've come up through the ranks with a very circuitous path, which we'll get into during this interview. But what have you seen work specifically from your purview in terms of getting more women into business, into technology?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I am an electrical engineer, right, by education, and so listening to the prior discussion about STEM and how important STEM is to the advancement of society across all industries is very near and dear to my heart. What I think has really worked is, first of all, everyone's got to lean in here in terms of being an ally and being a supporter. This is not an issue or an opportunity only women can solve for themselves. Obviously, the numbers don't play in our favor. And so if it's only women who are helping women and leaning in to try to learn what the issues are and what the barriers may be, whether they're conscious or unconscious, we'll never get there. And so top-down sponsorship, quite frankly, to me is one of the number one things. I mean, if the leadership of any organization is not committed to change and not committed to true diversity, equity, inclusion, ultimately the organization, cannot be successful. So.
I want to talk a little bit about unconscious bias. It was actually the topic of our show just yesterday, so we had a deep dive into that with one expert. But I want to hear from you. How did unconscious bias creep into your career? You started out as a trained pianist, then you went into engineering. Now you're a business executive. Did someone along the way think, I don't know about her. I don't know if she can do this?
Yeah. So Caroline, sadly, that it happens all of the time, right? And why does it happen? It happens because bias is a part of the human condition. And so, the first thing that I want to clear is that unconscious bias resides in all of us, no matter our color, our race, our gender, our religion, our political disposition. To be human is to have bias. So let's just normalize it there. What is the first key thing to do, though, is to really try to understand and pour deeply into what those biases are within each of ourselves. And it is only through doing that we can really work to reframe bias. So, as an example, when I first started in the company, no doubt, I'm obviously Asian, right? And I'm an Asian American. And, at the time I was young, I was in my 20s, if you will. And there were all kinds of biases which existed around, hey, you're one of the only, if not the only, young woman of color engineer in the group, right? And so there was an appropriate level of jabbing, if you will, right? And this is back in the 90s, when things were perhaps not so progressive. If you fast forward to today, statements as such as, where are you from? No, where are you really, really from? You establish a divisiveness, if you will, that is very counter to what leading edge growth oriented performance teams need to be, right? And so it's something that we encountered, Caroline. I would expect that you've probably encountered it, right? And it's something that we all will be dealing with and working through, quite frankly, throughout our personal and professional lives.
Well, speaking of some of that work, I have a question here in the stream from Stacy, who says, how do you start to expose the hidden cultures and biases? And I'll add to that, you share that anecdote from the 90s, which is horrifying. I'd like to think that the workplace is a little bit more woke now. So how do we have these conversations in a way that leads to progress? When those comments get made, those moments get made where bias is exposed, where do you go from there?
Yes. So we have absolutely made progress on the environment with which we can make progress. Why do I say that? The time is really now. When we reflect on 2020, one of the things that happened in 2020, of course, was not just COVID, right, or an economic recession around the globe, but also was, I would say, an awakening, right, of broader society around systemic racism and social injustices. With the killings of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor. And so this is the time with which we have to surface these things. And Caroline, I'll just tell a quick example here as an evidence that this doesn't just happen back then in the 90s, but just the other week, someone on a video call like this, was with a set of external constituents, asked me what country I was from. Okay, and so
this is this week, Anne?
Yeah, this is a couple of weeks ago.
Okay, still 2021. Just want to clarify the year.
Absolutely 2021. Okay. And I just share that as an example of this exists. Period. Right. It is not a town-bound thing. It will continue to evolve. So to answer the question, so what do we need to do and how do we need to surface this? The first thing is to engage in the conversation. Back in the day when I was much younger, I would have been indignant by that question. Right. I would have gotten offended, right, by it personally. Now the way that I handle it is, I will answer and say, I'm from the United States. I was born here. And what country are you from? But in all seriousness, why did you ask that question, right? Is it because I look different than you might have thought that I should look or would look, right? And therefore, that leads you to a line of questioning that could be interpreted the wrong way, right, as offensive and the person being offended, which then harms the nature of what our relationship could be built on, right, which we want to be based on growth and progress and such. So the first thing is to engage in these candid and courageous conversations. If you happen to be a woman or a person of color, someone in an underrepresented community, the key thing is you also need allies, right? This isn't just, as I mentioned earlier, just women helping women or people of color helping people of color. This is all of us helping each other. In order to do that, we have to respect the journeys and individuality to the point of authenticity that we each bring to the table.
Well, and one of the reasons that I wanted to have you on is that your journey has been challenging, particularly this year, running AT&T's business unit, having to deal with the pandemic. Give us a little insight into what leading has been like through this crisis.
Yeah. It has been really an amazing thing. I reflect back on this past year, and it's hard to believe that we've been at this a year. And I resonate with this quote that I heard part of the way through in the early days of the pandemic, and that was, crisis doesn't develop leadership. Crisis reveals leadership, and in any moment of crisis, I think you really see the true muster of any person, any team, any culture organizationally. And so what it has been like for me, as relatively, I was in my role for less than a year when the pandemic hit, it really caused my organization and I to double down on purpose. We happen to be in a business that is essential, right? It is essential to consumers. It is essential to businesses all around the world. And our role is to ensure that businesses of all shapes and sizes across all industries were connected and remain connected, right, with the right type of technology and solutions they require. And so what the pandemic did and the crisis did was it caused us to drive an immense amount of focus on our core business, which is all around connections. I would also say from a leadership standpoint, and I feel that this would resonate with anybody out there, regardless of what your job is that what this period of time has shown us is that we thrive on the power of human connection, right? And so the challenges we have all faced here in how do you establish connection, how do you sustain connection, how do you grow connection, it has been quite a feat here. As we think about moving forward in what will be no doubt a hybrid environment into this next stage. And so for me, it has been really a test and a proven sort of foundation of what leadership should be. And we hope to embrace that and use it to make us stronger in service of our customers and our communities.
I want to hear more about this notion of being essential. Yeah, being essential, it inherently means that comes with a lot of pressure.
Yes.
How did you deal with that pressure? How did you maintain your mental health? We see so many members on LinkedIn struggling with their mental health and sanity throughout this pandemic. How did you do it?
Yeah, so I will admit, Caroline, that I don't know that I do it very, very well, right? In fact, I love many of the articles that you all have surfaced around burnout, because I think this is a real significant issue. And what I would say, again, as a reflection of, there has been some good which has come out of 2020, and that is this awareness on mental health is just as important, right, as our physical health, right? And there has been a stigma associated with talking about mental health, right? About surfacing the fact that, hey, we are stressed, we are burdened, we need a break. And what the challenges of this, current heavily virtualized, heavily digitized work environment has done is it's put so much pressure on that blurring between our personal identity and our personal lives and our professional lives, if you will, right? And so the way that I have dealt with it, I mean, quite frankly, I just strive to be real. I try to be real, all the time. If I'm having not a great day, I don't say I'm having a great day. If I have found that, I think it's been commonly called Zoom fatigue. It's a real thing, right? Humans were not physiologically made to sit here in a sedentary way with our eyes completely focused, right, in one place for extended periods of time. And so I've been much more purposeful of deciding which forums I will visually engage in versus which forums I will, from an audio perspective, engage in. And I have been, one of my things in terms of 2021 is I want 21 to be better on all fronts. And I'm trying to shake it up a little bit physically, because 2020 was not good for me, admittedly, as it relates to care for myself.
Exactly. I don't think it was good for a lot of people. But Anne, I don't know about you, but I've also started to switch a lot of meetings to just audio or to a phone call. And I felt some guilt around that. But I will share with the members in the stream, we had a guest on a few weeks ago who actually says that we learn better, are able to receive information is actually higher when we are listening to it. So don't feel guilty if you're trying to get rid of your Zoom fatigue by switching some meetings to calls. All right, I'm going to say hello to some more members who are joining us. We have Keith from San Diego, Kristen from New York City, Elizabeth from New Jersey, and Dolores from Texas. And Dolores is adding to our conversation here. She says, so true that crisis reveals leadership within an organization, and how they handle it or adapt will determine their success or not. Dolores, thanks for joining Anne and I in this conversation. And on top of this pandemic, we just saw a reckoning against systemic racism over the summer and moving into 2021. I want to get your take on, as a corporate leader, how you've seen, you've been champion of diversity and inclusion for the entirety of your career, but how have conversations changed? Have they changed with your corporate peers on this topic?
Yeah, they very much have. I would say that, to quote one of my idols, who I recently had a chance to do a fireside chat with, Brene Brown, right? It's all about vulnerability. And I think that what 2020 has done, and I love your word, Caroline, in terms of reckoning, what 2020 has done for us is, in many ways, it's leveled this playing field of, we are all human, right? We are all flawed. We all have opportunities for growth, and we all have opportunities for learning. And as it relates to systemic racism and social injustice, right, we have an obligation to be better. We have an obligation to unleash the power of the workforce, the power of humanity, the power in our communities, which means that we have to acknowledge, understand, and embrace diversity. So the corporate environment now is more open than I have ever seen it. I am so optimistic about the environment, because courage is manifesting itself, right? And in that courage, we are having very difficult conversations. Just as one of the things that I've done within my organization is I actually have a series for my employees that I'm calling Candid Conversations. And in our first discussion, we had several of our Black leaders talk about what it was like to be Black in corporate America, the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? Yesterday I just hosted another one where we had some community leaders, a couple of moms in a local school district, a white mother and a Black mother, who came together to advocate for change, right? And change happens one person at a time. And I feel very, very optimistic that the time is now. But we've got to stay at it. This is not a moment. This is not a moment, right? It needs to be a movement.
Absolutely. Well, and speaking of that optimism, there are just hordes of future Ann Chows out there. Some of them may be joining us in the stream right now. You recently wrote a column in Fortune, which resonated with me, which is about the pipeline problem, why we need to stop talking about the pipeline problem. Why is the narrative around the pipeline problem? Why do we need to reinvent that?
Yes, you can see me getting agitated already, right, Caroline? Right. So yes, so I completely rebel against the idea that it's a pipeline problem, right? Because what the pipeline problem implies is that, oh, it's not my problem that there's not enough people who are qualified for these jobs who are diverse. That's completely bunk. I mean, if you look at statistics around, the evolution of the student bodies, right? Women represent over, half of bachelor's degrees and, over half of graduate degrees. When you look at the demographics of the next generations, which are up and coming, every generation. Now, I'm an old Gen Xer, right? But Gen Y is more diverse than Gen X. Gen Z is more diverse than Gen Y, and so on and so forth, right? And so the student population out there, whether you're talking about traditional four-year colleges, community colleges, or vocations, the population is becoming more diverse. So this is not a pipeline problem. What this is there are systemic issues in how each of us, right, may be recruiting, how we may be establishing relationships out there, whether it's in the educational community or otherwise, to source our talent, even mid-career talent, right? If you've only got one person, let's say, in a particular role doing your interviews, you can rest assured that that person's unconscious bias is going to infiltrate the decision-making, right? If you don't take a panel approach as an example. And so I would offer to you, Caroline, that it is not the pipeline, it is your processes and it is your people. Right? Because
Absolutely.
again, bias exists in our systems or processes, as well as in each of us as people who are making those decisions.
Well, as I like to say, we don't have to fix women. We have to fix the workplace. And Ann,
Yes.
I so appreciate you joining us on LinkedIn News Live and sharing just how we can do just that.
Yes. Thank you so much, Caroline.
That was Ann Chow. She's CEO of AT&T Business. All right, tomorrow on LinkedIn News Live, how gaining new skills has become the new currency in a post-COVID world. We'll hear from Nationwide's SVP of Talent and Organizational Effectiveness on how workplace learning and development is important and why it matters for your career. I'm Caroline Fairchild. Thanks for watching LinkedIn News Live.